As time moves forward, even the most private lives quietly transform. And for Sandra Bullock, that transformation is reflected in the life of her son, who is no longer the small child the world once glimpsed, but a young person growing into his own identity. The phrase, all grown up, carries more than just a passage of time. It carries a story of motherhood, of protection, and of a life carefully kept away from the spotlight. While the public may focus on how familiar he looks, what truly stands out is a journey behind that image. A journey shaped by love, stability, and the quiet strength of a mother who chose to prioritize family over fame. In a world where celebrity children are often pushed into attention, his life reflects something different, something more grounded, where growth happens naturally and away from constant exposure. And in that quiet evolution, there's a deeper meaning, not just resemblance, but the reflection of values, care, and a life built with intention beyond the cameras. Time moves quietly, often without warning, and one day the moments we once held on to have already passed. For Sandra Bullock, that passage of time is reflected in the life of her son, a child the world once saw briefly, now growing into someone with his own presence, his own identity, and his own path. The phrase, all grown up, may sound simple, but behind it lies a story filled with care, protection, and a mother's quiet determination to give her child something rare in the world of fame, normalcy. For years, Sandra Bullock has been one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood. Her success, her roles, and her personality have made her beloved across generations. But beyond the spotlight, there's always been another side to her life, a deeply personal side centered around family. When she became a mother, that side became her priority. Her son, Louis Bardo Bullock, entered her life not as a public moment, but as a personal one. His arrival marked a shift, a quiet turning point where fame took a step back and motherhood took the lead. From the beginning, she made a clear choice to protect his childhood from the pressures of the spotlight. This choice is not common in Hollywood. Many celebrity children grow up surrounded by cameras, attention, and expectations. Their lives are often shared, analyzed, and discussed. But Sandra Bullock chose a different path. She created space, privacy, and a sense of normal life that allowed her son to grow without constant public attention. As the years passed, the world saw very little of him. Occasional glimpses, rare appearances, and quiet moments captured from a distance. These were the only reminders that time was moving forward. And then, slowly, those glimpses began to show change. The small child people once remembered was no longer there. In his place stood someone older, more confident, and unmistakably growing into his own identity. The phrase, "he looks familiar," often draws attention to physical resemblance. People search for similarities, comparing features, expressions, and presence. But familiarity is not only about appearance. It is also about something deeper, values, personality, an environment that shapes a person, in the case of Louis Bardo Bullock. That familiarity may come from the quiet strength and grounded nature that Sandra Bullock has always carried. It is reflected not just in how he looks, but in how he has been raised, away from noise, away from pressure, and closer to a life built on balance. Motherhood, for Sandra Bullock, has never been about public display. It has been about presence, about being there, guiding, protecting, and supporting. This approach has allowed her son to grow naturally, without the weight of expectations that often come with fame. Another important part of this story is the idea of growth itself. Growth is not always visible in dramatic ways. It happens slowly, through everyday moments, through learning, through experiences, and through time. And when it finally becomes visible, it can feel surprising. Even though it has been happening all along, as her son grows older, the question naturally arises. What path will he choose? Will he step into the spotlight, following the world his mother knows so well? Or will he continue on a quieter path, shaped by the privacy he has known? These questions remain unanswered, and perhaps that is exactly how it should be. What matters most is not the path he chooses, but the foundation he's been given. A foundation built on love, stability, and the freedom to grow without pressure. This foundation is what will guide him, no matter where his journey leads. Her story also reflects a larger truth about fame and family. Success in the public does not always mean a life lived in public. It is possible to create boundaries, to protect what matters, and to choose what is shared and what is kept private. Sandra Bullock has shown that balance is possible, as time continues to move forward, her son's growth becomes a quiet reminder of how quickly life changes. Childhood passes, moments fade, and new chapters begin. But within those changes, there is also continuity. The values, the care, and the love that remain constant. In the end, the story is not just about a child growing up. It is about a mother's choice to create a different kind of life, one that values privacy over attention and meaning over visibility. The phrase, all grown up, may capture a moment, but the real story lies in everything that led to that moment. The years of quiet care, the decisions made behind the scenes, and the commitment to giving a child a chance to grow freely. And the familiarity people see is not just an appearance. It is in the reflection of a life built with intention, a life shaped by love, and a journey that continues beyond what the world can see. Because in the end, what truly matters is not how familiar someone looks, but how they were raised, what they were given, and the path they choose to walk as they move forward. And in that quiet, steady journey, a new story is still being written, one that belongs not to spotlight, but to life itself, as the story continues to unfold. The journey of Sandra Bullock and her son Louis Bardo Bullock begins to reveal something even more meaningful: the quiet power of growing up away from expectations. In a world where many children of fame are shaped by public opinion before they even understand it, his life has followed a different rhythm, a slower, more grounded rhythm that allows identity to form naturally, without pressure. There is something rare in that kind of upbringing. It reflects a conscious decision, not just to protect a child, but to give him space to discover who he is on his own terms. For Sandra Bullock, this decision was not about avoiding the spotlight. It was about choosing what truly mattered. And what mattered most was not fame, but family. That as her son grows older, the idea of familiarity begins to take on a new meaning. It is no longer just about resemblance or shared features. It becomes about presence, about character, about the subtle ways in which values are passed from one generation to the next. The calm confidence, the grounded nature, these are the things that feel familiar, even if they are harder to see. Another important truth in this story is the idea that time changes perspective. What once felt like a distant glimpse of the child now becomes a moment of realization that years have passed and a new chapter has begun. These moments remind us how quickly life moves, even when we're not paying attention. Her journey as a mother also reflects the balance between protection and freedom. Protecting a child does not mean controlling their future. It means creating a safe space where they can grow, make choices, and eventually step into their own life with confidence. Sandra Bullock has walked that balance carefully, allowing her son to grow while keeping him grounded. There is also a quiet strength in the way she has handled this responsibility. In an industry where attention is constant, choosing privacy requires discipline. It requires saying no to opportunities that could bring visibility, and yes to moments that remain unseen. This kind of strength is not always recognized, but it is deeply important. As the years continue, her son's story becomes his own. While he may always be connected to his mother in the public eye, his identity will be shaped by his own experiences, his own choices, and his own understanding of the world. This transition, from being seen as someone's child to becoming an individual, is one of the most important parts of growing up. And through it all, the foundation remains the same. A foundation built on care, consistency, and the belief that a child deserves a chance to grow without unnecessary pressure. This foundation does not guarantee a specific path, but provides the support needed to face whatever path is chosen. In the end, the story of Sandra Bullock and her son is not about fame or recognition. It is about something much quieter, yet far more powerful. The ability to create a life that feels real, stable, and meaningful, even in a world that is often anything but. And as this journey continues, it serves as a reminder that growth does not need to be loud to be important. Sometimes, the most meaningful changes happen quietly, over time, in ways that are only fully understood when we take a moment to look back. Because in the end, what makes this story powerful is not just that he's grown up, but how he was allowed to grow, and the kind of life that shaped him along the way as the story reaches its most quiet and reflective point. The journey of Sandra Bullock and her son Louis Bardo Bullock begins to feel less like a headline and more like a lesson, one about time, choice, and the kind of life that is built away from constant attention. What once started as a simple curiosity, he's all grown up, slowly becomes something much deeper, something that speaks the way a child becomes who they are. There's a quiet beauty in watching growth that was never rushed or forced. In a world where so many young lives are shaped by expectations, his journey has been allowed to unfold naturally. This freedom is rare, especially in the shadow of fame, and it is this freedom that gives his story its strength. For Sandra Bullock, motherhood was never about creating a public image. It was about creating a real life, one where her children could experience normal moments, make mistakes, learn, and grow without the pressure of being watched. This decision, repeated over the years, shaped everything that followed. As her son continues to grow, the world may still look for familiar features, searching for reflections of his mother in his face or personality. But the real familiarity lies somewhere deeper. It lies in the quiet confidence, in the grounded nature, and in the sense of balance that comes from being raised with care rather than expectation. Another powerful truth in this story is the idea that not everything needs to be shared to be meaningful. Some of the most important moments in life happen in private, in conversations, in small decisions, in everyday experiences that never reach the public eye. These moments are what truly shape a person, and they are what have shaped his journey. As time continues, his story will move further into independence. The world may become more curious, more attentive, more interested in who he will become. But no matter what path he chooses, the foundation he stands on will remain the same, a foundation built on love, protection, and the freedom to grow. This is what makes the story so powerful. Not the fame, not the curiosity, but the intention behind every choice. The decision to step back, to protect, and to allow life to unfold naturally. These are the choices that create lasting impact. In the end, the phrase, all grown up, is not just about age. It is about a journey completed and another one just beginning. It is about the transition from childhood into independence, from being guided to making choices of one's own. And as the story gently fades into its final reflection, one truth becomes clear. What truly matters is not how familiar someone looks, but how they were allowed to grow, what they were given along the way, and the kind of person they're becoming. Because when everything else fades, the headlines, the curiosity, the attention, what remains is something far more important. A life shaped by care, guided by values, and built quietly one moment at a time. And as the story settles into its final quiet moment, the journey of Sandra Bullock and her son Louis Bardo Bullock becomes something more than just a glimpse into a celebrity's private life. It becomes a reflection of what truly matters when the noise of the world fades away. What once began as curiosity about how much he has grown now turns into something deeper, a realization that growth is not measured in years alone, but in the way a life is shaped behind the scenes. There is something powerful in the silence that surrounded his upbringing. No constant headlines, no forced appearances, no pressure to become something before he was ready. Instead, there was time to learn, to experience, and to understand the world without being defined by it too early. That kind of space is rare, and it is what makes his journey stand out. For Sandra Bullock, this was never accidental. It was a choice made again and again, a quiet commitment to protect what could easily have been exposed. In doing so, she created something far more valuable than public admiration. She created a sense of stability, a grounded life that allowed her son to grow with confidence rather than expectation. As he continues to step into his own future, the idea of familiarity fades into something more meaningful. It is no longer about resemblance or recognition. It is about character, about the unseen lessons, the values passed down, and the quiet strength that comes from being raised with care. Another truth that lingers in the story is the idea that not all important stories are loud. Some of the most meaningful ones unfold quietly, away from attention, built through everyday moments that never make headlines. These are the moments that shape a person, that define who they become when no one is watching. And perhaps that is the most powerful part of this journey. Not the fame, not the curiosity, but the intention behind it all. The decision to choose a different path, to value privacy over exposure, and to focus on what truly lasts. In the end, the story of Sandra Bullock and her son is not about the spotlight. It is about stepping away from it. It is about understanding that real growth happens in quiet spaces, where life can unfold naturally without pressure or expectation. Because when everything else is stripped away, what remains is simple but powerful, a life built with purpose, shaped by love, and guided by choices that were never meant to impress the world, but to protect something far more important. And in that quiet, steady truth, their story finds its real meaning. one that continues, unseen but deeply felt, long after the world stops looking. And as everything gently fades into its final reflection, the journey of Sandra Bullock and her son Louis Bardo Bullock becomes a quiet reminder of something the world often forgets, that the most meaningful lives are not always the most visible ones. In a time where attention is constant and exposure is everywhere, their story stands as something different, something calmer, something real. What began as a simple observation, he's all grown up, has transformed into a deeper understanding of what it truly means to grow. It is not just about age or appearance. It is about the environment that shapes a person, the choices made for them when they are young, and the freedom they are given to become themselves. For Sandra Bullock, every step of this journey reflects intention, not the kind that seeks recognition, but the kind that builds a life quietly, carefully, and with purpose. She chose to step back when she could have stepped forward. She chose to protect when she could have shared. And in those choices, she created something lasting. As her son continues to move forward into his own life, the spotlight may slowly begin to turn toward him. Questions may grow, curiosity may rise, and the world may once again try to look closer. But no matter what comes next, one thing will remain unchanged: the foundation he was given. That foundation, built on privacy, stability, and care, is what will guide him through whatever path he chooses. It is what will allow him to face attention without being defined by it, to move forward without losing himself, and to create a life that reflects who he truly is. And perhaps that is a true meaning behind everything, the realization that what we see on the surface is only a small part of a much larger story. The real story exists in the unseen moments, in the quiet decisions, and in the everyday experiences that shape a life over time in the end, this is not just a story about growing up. It is a story about being allowed to grow the right way, about being given space, time, and the freedom to become something genuine. Because when all the curiosity fades and attention moves on, what remains is something far more important: a life built with care, guided by values, and carried forward with quiet strength. And in that final, quiet truth, their story does not end, it simply continues, just as it always has, steady, grounded, and real. That I end the quiet aftermath of attention. When the questions slow and the spotlight softens, the story of Sandra Bullock and her son Louis Bardo Bullock remains, not as a headline, but as something far more enduring. It becomes a reminder that the most powerful choices are often the ones no one sees, the ones made in silence, far away from applause or approval. There's a certain kind of strength in choosing what not to share. In a world that constantly asks for more access, more visibility, more exposure, there is courage in saying no, courage in protecting moments, in preserving childhood, and in allowing life to unfold without interruption. This is a kind of strength that does not demand recognition, yet leaves the deepest impact. As her son continues to step into his own future, the story gently shifts away from the past and toward possibility. Who he becomes will not be defined by curiosity or comparison, but by the quiet years that shaped him. Years filled not with noise, but with guidance, not with pressure, but with patience. For Sandra Bullock, this may be one of her most meaningful roles, not the ones played on screen, but the one lived in real life. A role where success is not measured in awards or recognition, but in the kind of person her child becomes. And in that sense, her greatest achievement may never fully be seen by the public, yet it will always be felt. Time will continue, as it always does. New stories will rise, new faces will appear, and attention will move forward. But some stories remain quietly in the background, not because they're forgotten, but because they were never meant to be loud. They were meant to be lived. And that is where this journey finds its true meaning, not in how it is seen, but in how it was built. Not in the curiosity it creates, but in the care that shaped it. Because in the end, when everything else fades away, what truly lasts is simple: a life given a chance to grow naturally, a path guided with intention, and a story that never needed the spotlight to matter. And in that quiet, steady truth, their story continues, exactly as it was meant to, unseen, unforced, and deeply real. And as the story reaches its final stillness, the journey of Sandra Bullock and her son Louis Bardo Bullock becomes less about what the world sees and more about what the world often misses. Because behind every quiet decision, behind every step taken away from the spotlight, there was a purpose, a simple but powerful intention to protect something purer. There is a certain truth that only reveals itself with time. that the loudest lives are not always the most meaningful, and that the strongest foundations are often built in silence. In choosing privacy, in choosing distance from constant attention, she created something that cannot easily be replaced, a childhood that belonged fully to her son, not to the public, that as he continues to grow into his own life, the world may continue to look for familiarity, searching for reflections of his mother in who he becomes. But what truly matters will not be what others recognize. It will be what he carries within